well, was here just a week or so ago on a completely different, well, not completely different, but a different topic. Erica Staab-Abscher is with us this morning. She is the executive director of the Hope Center here in Faribault. But Erica's written a terrific book. I can say that because I've read it. It's called She Stays. And I was telling Erica before we hit the airwaves, what I love most about this book, Erica, is you just go to the core of the issue.
Absolutely, and I think that is what is so different, because so often people try to, just go on and on and on, and
yeah, right.
And I think it is that simple.
It's right down to the core. I would recommend everybody read this book for a couple of reasons. Obviously, it's a good book, and the proceeds go benefit your Hope Center.
They do, and in this particular time period, we're going for our capital campaign, so that's where all of the proceeds from the book are going to be going.
How've sales gone?
Really well so far. There was an article in the paper, and so there's been several people that have stopped down by Hope Center, and we had 100, and there's, I think, only 20 left in the box. So.
Well, I hate to admit this, because then it makes me out to be a real soft guy, I guess, but I did cry a couple of times reading this.
Well, thank you.
So you obviously touched a portion of my heart, anyway.
Yeah, well, when I wrote this, I actually wrote it all in one night. And it took a longer time to, finesse with it and everything, but the bulk of it was written in one night, and I brought it the next day to our support group, and I said, you need to read this. Does this make sense? Is this accurate? And because it was really pulled from my experiences and from what I had been
told. You can tell, yes.
Yeah. And so I had given it to several of the support group members, and one of the ones that always uses humor as a defense mechanism, and, she never gets touchy-feely or anything like that. And she got done reading it, she handed it to me, and she started crying, and she said, you need to publish this. So that's why I started.
And you self-published it?
I did, yep. I went through CreateSpace, which is an arm of Amazon, and so it's a fantastic way to get your work out in the world.
Yeah, I know you like to write some poetry. There's some of that in here.
Yes, yeah. I love to write poetry, and that's one of my favorite pieces to write.
So. And you take pictures, and the pictures in here, I don't know, maybe you can explain better than I, well, you probably can, but the pictures really do seem to go with the message.
Yeah, and that's what I tried to do, is to pull out some of the message, and because I'm a visual person, so I love to see things, and so that part was really fun for me.
Yeah, I'll bet it was. Some of these pictures are downright awesome.
Thank you.
Like this one right here. See if I can show that on our...
Yeah. That one was taken at the Riverbend Nature Center, so there's quite a few in this book that are from the Nature Center. There's one with hoarfrost and the branches of the tree, and, sunsets, and there's, even in the community garden, my dad has a plot there, and there's some beautiful sunflowers. And
I am probably one of the people that have haunted you over the years, because I think every time you've been on the air, I've asked you that question, why does she stay?
Yes. But that's also why I wrote it, because everybody has that question, unless you're working in it, and that was really the other impetus for this was, Margie Brown was murdered when, March 7th of, I think it was 2013.
Yeah.
And she, I was friends with her, and we had many mutual friends, and people started talking on Facebook and saying, asking that question. And at first I got really frustrated, because I'm like, these are my friends, don't they know better? And I realized, no, they didn't, and that's why they were asking. And so as soon as I went on and said, well, this might be a reason, this might be a reason, and then other people who had experienced it started chiming in and saying, this was my reason. So that's really why I felt, everybody needs to hear this.
It had to be doubly difficult for you, though, because you work in the field, to have a friend die from domestic violence.
It does, and that's actually my second friend, oddly enough. And Julie Carroll was the first woman that I had known that had been murdered as a result of domestic violence, and she's really why I went into doing what I do. I wanted to make sure that nobody else had to experience what her family went through. So.
18 years you've been doing this, you say, in the back of your book.
Yes, yeah, and I've worked at the local, state, and national level, and it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, well, you're helping people, that's the neat thing, but you hear some gruesome stories, I'm sure.
Indeed, we do, yeah. And that's why, when people read the headlines and they're so shocked, and I'm not always, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk more about She Stays. We'll tell you how you can get the book. Yeah. Well, that's your maiden name.
Correct, yes.
So, you just went with that because you already authored a book. That makes sense.
I did, yeah. And that's what, quote unquote, the world knows me as. So
yes, that's what I mean. The creative world knows you as.
Exactly.
The other book, by the way, is The In-Between. I'm going to have to read that book after reading this one.
Yeah.
What's that about?
It's, it was originally written as a letter to a friend who was going through a divorce and was struggling with healing. And so it's really kind of a letter to a person to support and encourage and get them through that in-between, and to let people know it's okay to be in the in-between, because we often want to go from the tragedy, crisis, question, whatever it is, to the healing part, and there's a huge place in between.
Oh
So.
yeah, we've all heard about people on the rebound.
Right.
Is what it's called, on the rebound, which
Yep.
is true.
Yeah, and so this is just letting people know it's okay to be where you're at, and that you won't always be at that place. So.
Yeah. So again, She Stays is the name of the book. As Erica notes on the back of her book, she's always been haunted by the question, why does she stay, every time it's asked. And of course I've haunted her every time she's been on the show. But it is the natural question.
It is, absolutely. And you know, one of the things that we want to do is shift the question to, why does he abuse? And if it is a she and he situation,
right.
Why does he abuse? So.
And again, you note in the book too, the reason you use women in here is because they're the ones that are most often abused.
Right, right. And 90% of the time that's who we're working with, but there is that 10% of the time that it's a male victim.
What I love about this book, the first portion, you ask the question.
Yeah.
And then the second portion, you provide some answers.
Absolutely. And I think that is what is so important is, you know, half of it is about her experience and why she might stay, and the other half is how the community can help support and surround her and help her get out of that situation.
Yeah, I just never could get my head around why you would let someone abuse you, regardless of who they are. But I can see why it is more difficult when it's somebody that's been very close to you.
Right. Well, and it doesn't begin like that. It begins very, you know, much
Sure.
like any other relationship. And also, if that's what you grew up in, that's what you come to expect, and you don't know that there's anything different, or you might not feel like you deserve anything different. And there's also just the question of, how did I get here? You know, there's so many people that say, but in the beginning it was so wonderful, and he was so attentive and so wonderful, and then that attentiveness turns into jealousy, and then that jealousy turns into rage. And it is a process, and so by the time you're to that point, it's just, you know, kind of mystifying. And also there's been so much verbal abuse at that point that that person feels like they're worthless. And so, you know, those voices of saying, nobody else will want you, I can't imagine anybody will ever believe you. And then, you know, if they're hearing these things on television or seeing them in the news or hearing other people talk about them, they're saying, you know, well, why would she stay? So that's, you know, that shame is a huge piece.
I'm going to guess, you said you wrote this down in one night, which I can believe. I read it in probably 20 minutes.
Yep.
And I could have probably read it in less, but I wanted to stop in places and think through what you said, see. So I can believe you wrote it one night. Most difficult thing probably had to be putting the pictures with.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and figuring out how to split it up and how it, you know, how it kind of flowed. So yeah, but that was the most difficult part, but also the most fun part to be able to pull pictures that correlated with the words and really kind of visually represent that.
So how many pictures did you have before you came down to the ones you used in the book?
I have quite a lot, over 1,000, I think. So.
Yeah. It is a terrific book. Where can people get this?
Well, they can stop by Hope Center, or there's a Create Space that's on our Facebook page. They can go there, or they could go to Amazon. However, if you go to Hope Center, then we get most of the proceeds. If you go through Amazon, then of course they take some of those proceeds.
Okay. How much is it?
It is $10 if you purchase it from Hope Center, and $12 if you purchase it from Amazon.
Oh, very reasonable.
Yes.
I mean, the pictures are in color.
Yeah, they are. I think it's a great value, so.
I don't think there's any question about it. And I really am serious when I say everyone should read this, because, as I mentioned before, we are never going to stop the cycle of violence until we embrace the things you touch on in your book.
Absolutely.
For example, as I mentioned earlier, I did tear up in a couple of places here. The one where I kind of had crocodile tears was when on one of the pages you say, she stays because she did get up the courage to tell her pastor once, but he said, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Mark chapter 10, verse 9. Go home and pray harder. So she goes home to pray harder.
And that was actually from an experience that I had when I was in a shelter in South Carolina. There was a pastor who had told his parishioner that that's what she should do. And so when she came to the shelter, she was devastated and felt like that faith community was no longer a safe place for her. And so luckily I was there that night and had a chance to talk to her, but I still think, even after 4 hours of talking to her, I don't know that helped any of the words that he had said. And as you'll note later in the book, there's the opposite response as well. And pastors and faith communities can be such a huge and critical component of getting up the courage and being able to leave. I have an example right now of a minister in our community that's working with one of our clients, and she's fantastic and has been helping so much, and reiterating what we're saying, and and that has been such a huge piece of her being able to say, yes, I can do this, and she's now in the process of leaving.
No, I didn't mark that page, and I should. The answer, something to the effect of he broke the vow when he raised his hand.
Yeah, and that's actually in the Torah, is that once he raises his hand in violence, he's the one who breaks the vow. So that is actually in the Jewish tradition.
And Erica Staab is with us. She Stays is the name of the book, and the only place to get this outside of Amazon is at Hope Center.
Is at Hope Center, yeah.
Sorry, I had to cough there. Coughing is better than crying, I guess. Why does she stay? Oh, quite a question. Hopefully I won't ask this again when you're not here.
Well, now you're educated, so now you'll know all the answers.
Well, I don't know about all the answers, but you do provide a number of them here. These are all things that you've heard over the years.
Yes, yep, all things that I've heard and seen people go through, and yeah, when you hear as many stories as I've heard, there's a lot of themes, and so I kind of pulled out some of the themes.
Yeah. Put them all together is a difficult thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The book dedicated to the women you mentioned earlier.
It is, yep, to Julie and Margie. Yeah, and both of them being from Faribault, and many people know them and love them, and
you asked the families beforehand, or how does that work?
Yes, yeah, I asked, because I'm in contact with both of their families yet, and so I asked to make sure that would be okay, and they both said that it would be an honor, so.
Toward the beginning of the book, Erica writes, she stays because she loves him. She stays because love has turned into fear.
Yes. And when we talk about, when I do presentations, I'll often say that there's 2 4-letter words, and it's love and fear.
Not that far apart in this case.
No. And again, it begins with that love, and it begins with, words of affirmation and all of these pieces. It doesn't begin with a slap.
She stays because she doesn't want the relationship to end. She just wants the violence to stop.
And I've heard that so many times. That they don't want the relationship to end. They just want him to be nicer, for it to be more calm or more like it was in the beginning. And there's always that hope that maybe we can go back to where we were in the beginning.
Were most of these pictures taken at Riverbend Nature Center?
A lot of them were. Yep, they were either at Riverbend or I went to St. John's Monastery for a weekend one time, and there's several pictures from St. John's there as well. But a lot of them are from Nature Center.
Very nice. She stays because he used to say, "You are my angel. I am so glad you are in my life. You are so beautiful. I love you. I can't imagine life without you." Those words echo in her mind while words flung like knives leave cuts on her heart. You are worthless. Can't you get anything right? You are lucky to have me. No one else will want you. Don't even try to imagine a life without me. The competing voices keep ringing in her ears. His voice becomes louder and more powerful than anyone else's in her head, even her own, and she starts to believe him. That was another area where wow. I mean, it kind of like smacked me in the head when I read that.
Yeah, and I do think that that's what we forget, is when we're surrounded by anything, it's what we absorb and what we begin to believe. And so when that's what you're continually surrounded by, you begin to believe that.
It's a form of brainwashing.
Absolutely, yep. And there's another technique called gaslighting, and it's based on I think it's an 1846 movie, but where people will kind of just little subtle ways of saying, no, you're being crazy, I don't hear that, I don't see that, and then she begins to doubt herself. And so there's a lot of that happens too, is the doubting of yourself and saying, well, maybe that's not the way I see it, maybe he is right. And so there's a lot of that happens too.
And during that time, there's no abuse going on, physical abuse?
Often, no. Physical abuse only begins when verbal abuse no longer does what he wants to do.
So is this a power thing?
It's absolutely a power thing, and we have a great tool called the power and control wheel that shows all of the different ways that people use to manipulate, to control things like financial control and relationship isolation. You know, there's all these different ways that violence can be inflicted beyond just the physical violence.
You know, you talk about the fact that in many of these instances the woman doesn't go out with her friends much anymore because he doesn't want that to happen.
Right, right. And oftentimes he'll control, you know, I've heard of cases where he takes the phones when he leaves the house, or where he'll take all the keys to the cars. And oftentimes, again, the physical, or the financial piece of it, the house is in his name, the cars are in his name, and so if she were to leave, there would be very little for her. And often, not always, but often there's not enough money for divorce and, you know, those type of things too. So there's those complications as well.
So again, no physical abuse involved here, but mental abuse.
Right, and you know, in my many years of doing this, I've never had a person say that the physical abuse was worse. The mental abuse is always worse, because those scars don't heal, and the bruises and those things will heal, but it's those words that kind of echo and continue.
It has to be tough. It has to be tough to make that decision to leave.
Absolutely, because there's so many factors involved, and you know, there's often children involved, there's often, you know, that fear, and especially if, you know, there's certain cases where he has friends who are echoing all of these things as well, and so.
Well, I'm sure you've had cases where he's just great with the kids.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
The kids just absolutely love and adore their father, and
yes.
She doesn't want to take the father away from the kids.
Exactly, and that's often why people will stay. And there's often an impetus when he begins to hurt the children. She stays while he's hurting her because of the children, and then once that begins to go to the children as well, then that's often when she'll decide I need to leave.
Well, that happened in my mom's family. My grandfather came home from World War I, a little bit loony.
Mm-hmm.
The war affected him in that way, mentally, and he started having fights with her older brother, and he kicked my mom in the rear end as she was leaving the house for school one day, and that was the day that my grandma said, "Can't live here anymore."
Mm-hmm.
Never divorced him, but had to move out of the house. Couldn't be in that same. That had to be really tough, the more I think about that.
Well, especially in that time, because there wasn't.
Oh yeah, we're talking, you know, 20s, 30s.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't handle things the way they do now back then.
Absolutely.
So Erica Staab, again, the name of the book is She Stays. Sorry, I get a little choked up here when I talk about my mom being, abused. We talked about the pastor. The other page that really hit me was the last one, I think. I thought I marked it, but obviously the marks left me. Yeah, the last page. On the very last page, you say, "You are not alone."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the other pieces, is people feel so isolated and they feel like they're the only ones that have ever experienced this. And when we bring the power and control wheel to group and say, you know, these are all the ways, and they'll say, how did you get his playbook? How did you know? And there's so many times where people think that they're the only ones that are experiencing this, and I've run into that so many times, and I just want to make sure that people know they're not alone, and there's a place that they can come where we won't judge, there's no shame involved. And, you know, all of our services at Hope Center are free and confidential, and we make sure that they have what they need.
The first portion of the book, it seems to me, well, I guess you do have more. You have some sunny. I was thinking the first portion of the book, you had the more winter, dreary kind of scenes. In the latter part, you bring out the colorful flowers as we turn our attention to answers. But I guess I'm wrong.
Well, it's a little bit of both, but
yeah.
Well, and that goes back to another reason why she stays, because it's not all dreary all the time.
Well,
there are these
true.
Moments of sun and beautiful flowers, and thinking, well, maybe it is changing, and then that hope is yet again dashed.
So the first portion, why does she stay? The second portion, you emphasize the reason she can leave is because she gets some help.
Absolutely. And, it is the faith community. It is law enforcement responding appropriately. It is, knowing that there's an advocacy center willing to help. It is knowing that her family understands and her family is willing to do one more time. Because we know that it takes an average of 7 times for a woman to leave.
7?
Yes, yeah. And we also know that that's the most dangerous time. And so that's the time that she needs to be taken most seriously. And by that 7th time, often people are like, well, whatever, and she's gonna just go back anyway. And so then there's not that seriousness, and we know that that's oftentimes when the most risk is.
We've all heard about women who have been killed or abused even after orders for protection have been issued.
Yes, yeah.
So that might be in their head too.
Absolutely. And you know, we do talk about that. Orders for protection are often something that people need to use, but they are a piece of paper. And ultimately, you know, we do everything in our power to make sure that they work the way they should, but there is a sense that, you know, that is only a piece of paper.
You touch on a police officer. She stays because the police officer that responded made her feel like she shouldn't have called, so the next time she doesn't call for help.
Yeah, and again, we've seen that, and then we've also seen the flip side, where because of the officer's response, because that person believed her, because they took the adequate reports and were able to connect her with resources and talking to Hope Center, then that makes all the difference in the world.
You talk about back in my grandma's day, back in the 20s, 30s, when that happened, and you kind of touch on that here. She says, because she is afraid to fail, she made a vow and she is committed to keep it. Her wedding vows. Back then, you know, it was etched in stone, that wedding vow.
Absolutely, and it was a private matter. You know, what happens in your home stays in your home, and nobody else is supposed to talk about what happens in your home. And so that's another huge piece and huge way to silence people is, you know, it's a private matter. And that's what we're also switching now, is this is a public concern. You know, and again, going back to looking at who's hurt and assaulted, it's often law enforcement, it's often, you know, her new boyfriend. It's other people involved in addition to this person. It's a public safety concern. It's not just these two people anymore. It is a public safety concern.
Yeah. A lot of questions, a lot of answers.
Absolutely.
And she stays. And again, what I really like about this book is its simplicity, Erica. It's not too wordy.
Yeah, I tried to make it so that it's an easy read but yet powerful.
Yeah, it is. You get to the point. You accomplished your goal.
Well, thank you.
Let me put it that way. You accomplished your goal. She can't believe this is her story. That hit me too, because think about that. She probably knows people that have been through this.
Absolutely.
And said to herself 100 times, that will never be me.
Absolutely. And again, that's something I've heard so many times. And it's insidious. It just goes a little by little by little, and all of a sudden you're in this place where you're thinking that.
So getting into the answers portion, I probably should have done that a little sooner, right? All of us can help.
Absolutely, yes.
By doing just little things like donating to the Hope Center or to Ruth's house or...
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, talking to your faith community and making sure that your pastor is doing sermons on domestic and sexual violence. You know, talking to your law enforcement, how are they responding? You know, we're lucky here that we have a great response in Rice County and that we're working with, you know, the sheriff and the chief of police in Northfield and Faribault, and so we have a great relationship with them. You know, I have many friends and colleagues in other places that don't even have that. You know, the Rice County Attorney's Office, their prosecution and, you know, making sure that they're doing all the things that they need to do. And so again, we have a great relationship with that office and have had one since I got here, which is fantastic. And so all those things, you know, all these people coming together and trying to make things better is powerful.
Have you worked with the Ministerial Association? Because
yes.
I never even thought about that, but when you cited the verse, you know, I could see a pastor saying that.
Yes, yeah, and luckily we've been able to have many conversations about why that might not be appropriate, and you know, and oftentimes I don't even need to do that because it's other pastors in that association that say, this is how I respond, and this is what I think is helpful, and so there's a definite shift within that as well.
Because they're looking for help, they're looking for answers when they're asking their pastor or they're asking their friend for advice. Right,
absolutely. And I tell people to put our number in your phone because you'll never know when you might need that.
And in many, do you want to give us the number so we can put that in our phone?
Sure. It is our safe line, which is answered 24 hours a day, and on holidays and everything, is 1-800-607-2330. And once again, that's 1-800-607-2330.
You need more volunteers to help, for example?
Of course, yes.
The
And we
person
actually
can help out that way?
Yep, and we have a volunteer training that's happening in April, so. they should let us know. Give us a call at our, and you can call the Safe Line and get our office, and we can hook you up.
Now, I know not just anybody could answer the phone.
No, you have to have a special spot in your heart to be able to do this, but there's many people who do. So
Oh, I'm sure.
And we can connect you with other opportunities to help too. If that's not your cup of tea, we can figure out what is.
Oh, I'm sure there are many other things that people could do to volunteer to help at the Hope Center or Ruth's House or any of the other groups that help people. So again, get a copy of this book, folks, down at the Hope Center. You want to tell us where you're located?
1003 7th Street, so right by the bridge that everybody ends up running into.
Yeah, the big
That's
semis,
us.
yeah.
Yes, that's our entertainment.
Yeah, literally, you're right next to that, too.
Yes, absolutely. You can feel the house shake sometimes, depending on how fast they're going.
I believe it. I really do.
Yeah.
So make sure you get on over there, folks, and grab a copy. It's only $10.
Yes.
And the proceeds benefit the Hope Center. So thanks for writing this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'm sure all the women want to thank you too, and men that have been abused. And you are not alone. If nothing else comes out of that book, that's the message that you want to deliver home. And that's why I love the way you ended it that way.
Thank you.
You just hammered right to the core. You are not alone. Great book. Super pictures. She Stays. Erica Staab. Did a super job. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it very much. Man, oh man. I don't know why people who love each other seem to hurt each other the most. That's a question. Well, maybe that's your next book.
Absolutely.
I don't understand. That concludes today's edition of AM Minnesota. Next week, we'll talk. Let's see, we got some folks coming in from Northfield on Monday. You're in tune.